Emma Chen hadn't slept well the night before. At 3 years old, she possessed a remarkable ability to sense when something significant was about to happen, and that sixth sense had kept her awake for most of the night. She'd overheard her mother mention the police K-9 demonstration at Riverside Park during a phone call with her best friend, and anxiety had gnawed at her ever since. The moment her mother hung up the phone, Emma's stomach began twisting into painful knots. She knew about police dogs. She knew they were big. She knew they barked. And most importantly, she knew they terrified her beyond reason. The fear had started 6 months earlier when her neighbor's golden retriever, a supposedly friendly and gentle dog, had lunged at the fence while Emma was playing in the yard with her toys. The sudden barking, the aggressive posturing, and the way the fence had rattled had created a traumatic imprint on Emma's young mind. That single incident had transformed her perception of all dogs. Every bark became a threat. Every dog she saw became a monster in her imagination. Her parents had tried everything to help her. They'd shown her gentle videos of puppies, introduced her to calm dogs at a distance, and offered her reassurance constantly. Nothing worked. The fear had only deepened. When Emma's older brother Marcus heard about the police demonstration, he immediately started teasing her relentlessly. At 9 years old, Marcus found his little sister's anxiety absolutely hilarious. He would bark unexpectedly when she wasn't paying attention, jump out from behind corners making growling sounds, and laugh hysterically when she screamed and ran for their mother. His teasing, while probably not intended to be cruel, had only amplified Emma's anxiety. Their mother had scolded him multiple times, explaining that Emma's fear was real and that mocking her wouldn't help. But Marcus continued anyway, finding endless entertainment in his sister's distress. The morning of the demonstration, Emma woke up before dawn. Sunlight hadn't yet begun to creep through the edges of her bedroom window, and the house was silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her small chest rising and falling with shallow, anxious breaths. She could already hear the barks in her imagination, deep, threatening sounds that made her skin crawl. She pulled her favorite stuffed rabbit closer to her chest, seeking comfort from the soft fabric and the memories of safety it represented. When her mother came to wake her at 7 o'clock, Emma clung desperately to the bedding. "Mama, I don't feel good," she whispered, hoping the excuse might work. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed and gently brushed Emma's hair away from her forehead. "Sweetheart, I know you're nervous about today, but you know what? Officer Martinez says his police dog is very special. His name is Duke, and he's a hero who has saved many people's lives. He's not a scary dog. He's a good dog who helps people." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But what if he's mean? What if he tries to bite me?" Her mother's expression was both sympathetic and determined. She understood her daughter's fear, but she also understood that enabling it wouldn't help Emma grow. "Emma, listen to me carefully. Sometimes the things we're most afraid of turn out to be wonderful when we're brave enough to face them. I'll be right next to you the whole time. You won't be alone. And Officer Martinez is a professional. He would never let anything bad happen to you." Throughout breakfast, Emma picked at her cereal listlessly. The milk seemed too thick, the cereal too crunchy. Every sound made her jump. When Marcus came downstairs, he immediately started making exaggerated barking sounds, pretending to be a fierce attack dog. "Woof, woof, aroo," he howled, running toward Emma with his hands up like paws. Emma screamed and knocked over her juice glass. Their father intervened firmly, sending Marcus to his room without breakfast. Emma felt guilty for getting her brother in trouble, even though she was terrified. This guilt only added to her emotional turmoil. As the morning progressed, Emma's anxiety grew exponentially. She went to the bathroom repeatedly, her stomach churning with nervous energy. She put on her favorite pink dress, hoping it would make her feel braver. She chose her shoes carefully, sneakers that would allow her to run if she needed to. She packed her special blanket in her backpack, the one her grandmother had made for her, thinking that having it close might provide comfort. Everything she did was preparation for what she anticipated would be the most frightening experience of her young life. When her mother announced it was time to get in the car, Emma's hands began to shake visibly. She moved in slow motion as if each step was an enormous effort. Her mother held her hand as they walked to the car, and Emma gripped it tightly enough to cause slight discomfort. As she was buckled into her car seat, Emma stared straight ahead, her mind racing with catastrophic scenarios. What if the dog escaped its leash? What if Officer Martinez couldn't control it? What if it attacked her right in front of everyone? What if she screamed so loudly that everyone laughed at her? During the drive to Riverside Park, Emma pressed her forehead against the car window, watching the familiar streets pass by. She wanted the car ride to last forever. As long as they were driving, they weren't at the park. As long as they weren't at the park, she didn't have to face Duke. Her mother played soft music on the radio and occasionally glanced back at her daughter with loving concern. "It's going to be okay, Emma. I promise you. You're so much braver than you think you are." The closer they got to the park, the more real the situation became. Emma could see the banner advertising the police K-9 demonstration from several blocks away. Her heart rate accelerated. Her palms began to sweat. She felt like she might throw up. The car slowed as they turned into the parking lot, and suddenly the park came into full view, colorful, festive, filled with families and children and excitement. And somewhere in that park was Duke, a big police dog. A dog that would surely be terrified of her, or worse, that she would be terrified of. Emma's small fingers trembled as they gripped the fabric of her mother's shirt. She didn't know that this day would change her life forever. She didn't know that she was about to discover a courage she didn't know she possessed. She didn't know that two simple words spoken to a police dog would echo across a park and touch the hearts of everyone who witnessed them. All she knew, as her mother unbuckled her seatbelt and took her small hand, was that she was about to face the scariest thing in her entire 3-year-old world. Retraille the park was absolutely buzzing with activity when they arrived on that warm Saturday afternoon. Families gathered on the manicured grass in small clusters, their presence creating a festive atmosphere that seemed almost surreal to Emma's anxious mind. Colorful balloons in red, blue, and yellow decorated the K-9 unit's booth, bouncing gently in the warm summer breeze. A large banner stretched across the front of the booth, proclaiming Riverside Police Department K-9 Unit Community Demonstration in bold, official letters. Children ran excitedly across the open spaces, their laughter filling the air, while vendors sold ice cream and popcorn from small carts positioned around the perimeter. The whole scene looked like a celebration, something joyful and safe. But for Emma, it felt like walking into a lion's den. Her mother parked the car near the entrance of the park, in a spot with a perfect view of the demonstration area. Emma sat rigidly in her car seat, her eyes fixed forward, barely breathing. She didn't move when her mother turned off the engine. She didn't reach for the door handle when invited. Instead, she remained frozen, her small body tense with anticipation of what was coming. And then, cutting through all the joyful sounds of the park, the laughter, the music, the conversations, came a sound that made Emma's blood run cold. A deep, authoritative bark. Not just one bark, but several in succession, each one more terrifying than the last. The sound was powerful, commanding, and absolutely petrifying to a 3-year-old girl with a deeply rooted fear of dogs. "That's just Duke introducing himself," her mother whispered gently, reaching over to unbuckle Emma's seatbelt. "He's excited to see everyone." Emma's eyes widened to enormous proportions, and her entire body began to tremble. That didn't sound like a friendly greeting. That sounded like a dangerous animal announcing its presence. That sounded like the exact thing she'd been dreading all morning. Emma's breathing became shallow and rapid as her mother opened the car door and prepared to lift her out of the seat. Emma's small hands immediately gripped the fabric of her mother's shirt with surprising strength, her knuckles turning white from the intensity of her hold. "Mama, I can't," Emma whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Please don't make me, please, I'll be good, I promise." Her mother's heart ached at the desperation in her daughter's voice, but she remained gentle but firm. She understood that giving in to Emma's fear would only reinforce it, would teach her that avoiding scary things was the right response. It was a delicate balance between compassion and doing what was best for her child's long-term development. They walked toward the demonstration area, with Emma's mother holding her securely while Emma clung to her like her life depended on it. Her legs moved mechanically, barely able to support her own weight. Other children passed them, running eagerly toward the gathering crowd, excited and anticipatory. Their joy only emphasized Emma's terror. She saw other children pointing at something in the distance, their faces lit up with wonder and excitement. Emma couldn't understand how they could be happy about this. Didn't they know what dogs could do? Didn't they understand the danger? Then Emma's brother Marcus appeared at their side, having separated from his father to catch up with them. At 9 years old, Marcus was fearless when it came to animals. He immediately began talking excitedly about the police dog he'd read about online. "Mom, did you know that police dogs can track criminals for miles? And they can jump like 8 feet high. And they have teeth that are super sharp." With each detail, Emma felt her anxiety spike higher. Marcus, noticing his sister's distress, grinned mischievously. He lowered his voice into a mock growl and said, "Aruo, I'm Duke and I'm coming to get Emma." He pretended to pounce toward his sister, making exaggerated snapping motions with his hands. Emma screamed, a high-pitched, piercing sound that turned several nearby heads. She buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her entire small frame shaking uncontrollably. Her mother immediately shot Marcus a look of disapproval. "That's enough, Marcus. Go find your father, please, now." Marcus, realizing he'd crossed a line, shuffled away reluctantly. But the damage was done. Emma's fear had escalated from significant anxiety to near panic. Her mother held her close, whispering reassurances and gentle words, trying to calm her daughter's racing heart. As they moved through the crowd toward the demonstration area, Emma noticed that the park had become louder and more crowded. There were at least 100 people gathered now, all waiting to see the K-9 unit. Emma felt trapped. There was no escape route, nowhere to run if things went wrong. She was surrounded by strangers and their children, all of whom seemed perfectly comfortable with the idea of being near a police dog. How could they be so calm? How could they be so brave? Emma felt utterly alone in her terror, even though her mother's arms were wrapped securely around her. Then she saw him, Duke, a massive German shepherd standing proudly beside a man in a crisp police uniform. The dog was enormous, at least as tall as Emma's mother when standing on his hind legs. His coat was tan and black, with alert, intelligent eyes that scanned the crowd with military precision. His ears stood at perfect attention, pointed upward and forward, tracking every sound. When Duke moved, every muscle in his body seemed to ripple with power and strength. To Emma, he looked like a furry mountain with teeth. He looked like everything she'd been terrified of since that day at the neighbor's fence. Emma's breathing quickened to a dangerous degree. Her mother felt her daughter's panic intensifying and held her a bit tighter. "Emma, sweetheart, look at me," her mother said softly, turning Emma's face toward her own. Emma's eyes were wide and glassy, filled with unshed tears. "Officer Martinez is a trained professional. That dog is a hero. He helps people. He's not going to hurt you. I'm right here with you. You're safe." Emma wanted to believe her mother, but the evidence in front of her, an enormous police dog that had just barked so loudly it made her want to run, contradicted everything her mother was saying. The officer noticed the crowd settling down and prepared to begin his demonstration. Emma's mother guided her slightly closer, positioning them at an angle where Emma could see but wasn't directly in Duke's line of sight. The crowd fell relatively quiet, and Emma realized this was really happening. This was really about to begin. She clutched her mother's shirt so tightly that her mother winced slightly. The sun beat down on the gathering, and Emma felt beads of sweat forming on her forehead despite her terror. Time seemed to slow down as Officer Martinez adjusted Duke's leash and prepared to begin speaking. Emma watched, her entire being tensed like a drawn bowstring, waiting for something terrible to happen. Officer Martinez's voice boomed across the gathered crowd with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to speaking in public. He was a tall man in his mid-40s, with broad shoulders and a commanding presence that immediately captured everyone's attention. His uniform was impeccably pressed, every button gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. But it wasn't his physical presence that made the crowd listen. It was his obvious passion for what he did and his deep love for the German shepherd standing beside him. As he began to speak, his entire face lit up with genuine pride and affection. "Good afternoon, everyone," Officer Martinez began, his voice carrying easily across the open space. "My name is Officer James Martinez, and this is Duke, my partner for the past 5 years. Duke is a specially trained police dog, and today I want to tell you about the incredible work he does for our community and beyond." The officer placed his hand on Duke's head, stroking the dog's ears gently. Emma watched this interaction carefully. The way Officer Martinez touched Duke was tender, respectful, almost loving. It was the touch of someone who genuinely cared about the animal, not someone who was forcing it to do anything against its will. Officer Martinez continued his presentation, explaining Duke's impressive background in impressive detail. Duke, he explained, had undergone 5 years of intensive police training, the kind of training that only the most exceptional dogs could complete successfully. Not every dog had the temperament, intelligence, or discipline required for such rigorous work. Duke had started his training as a young puppy, learning basic obedience before advancing to specialized skills. The officer described how Duke could track suspects through miles of terrain, using his extraordinary sense of smell, a sense that was approximately 10,000 times more sensitive than a human's. He explained how Duke could search buildings, detect explosives and illegal substances, and apprehend suspects with precision and control. But perhaps most importantly, Officer Martinez said, his voice becoming slightly emotional, Duke has participated in dozens of successful rescue missions. He has helped find lost children, missing elderly individuals with dementia, and lost hikers in our nearby mountains. Duke has literally saved lives. The officer paused, letting that statement sink into the crowd. Emma felt a slight shift in her perspective. A dog that saved lives. That didn't fit her image of dogs as dangerous monsters, but she remained skeptical and afraid. Officer Martinez then announced that he would demonstrate some of Duke's training and obedience. He moved to the center of the open area, creating a small performance space where the crowd could clearly see what was happening. Emma noticed that the other children leaned forward with intense interest, their eyes wide with excitement and anticipation. She remained partially hidden behind her mother, but she couldn't help watching what was about to happen. "Duke, sit," Officer Martinez commanded, his voice clear and authoritative but not harsh. Immediately, without hesitation, the massive German shepherd lowered his rear end to the ground, sitting in perfect position. His posture was alert and attentive, his eyes focused on his handler. The crowd erupted in applause and delighted cheers. Emma's heart continued to race, but she noticed something important. Duke had obeyed instantly, without any show of aggression or resistance. The dog was controlled, disciplined, responsive to commands. Officer Martinez continued the demonstration with increasing complexity. "Duke, stay," he commanded, walking several feet away from the dog. Duke remained perfectly still, not moving a muscle, not breaking eye contact with his handler. Other children pointed and giggled with delight at how obedient the dog was. Then Officer Martinez turned and called, "Duke, come." The dog sprinted toward his handler with incredible speed and agility, but came to an immediate stop when the officer raised his hand. The precision was remarkable. Duke stopped exactly where commanded, not overshooting or showing any disobedience. The demonstration continued with more complex commands. Officer Martinez asked Duke to perform a down position, lying flat on the ground with his body completely relaxed. Then he asked Duke to crawl forward while remaining in that position, a difficult and impressive feat that required immense control and focus. The dog executed every command perfectly. Afterward, Officer Martinez demonstrated Duke's ability to jump over obstacles, to weave through cones, and to perform a bite and hold exercise with a padded sleeve. showing how Duke could use controlled force without causing unnecessary harm. Throughout each demonstration, Emma found herself observing Duke's behavior more carefully than she'd thought possible. The dog was incredibly well behaved. He didn't seem aggressive or unpredictable. In fact, he seemed almost gentle. Yes, he was powerful and strong, but that power was completely under control. It was like watching a world-class athlete perform, impressive and awe-inspiring, but not inherently dangerous because of the discipline and training involved. After about 20 minutes of demonstrations, Officer Martinez addressed the crowd directly once more. As you can see, Duke is an extraordinary animal who has dedicated his life to serving our community. He's not a pet in the traditional sense, he's a working professional. But he's also a living being with feelings, emotions, and the capacity for love and affection. Now, I'd like to invite some of you, especially you children, to come up and meet Duke personally. We'll do this in an orderly fashion, and I'll make sure Duke is comfortable with each interaction. A line formed almost immediately. Children and some adults eagerly stepped forward, waiting for their turn to pet Duke. Emma watched as child after child approached the dog, reached out their small hands and touched Duke's soft fur. Duke responded to each interaction with remarkable patience and gentleness. His tail wagged slowly. His whole body seemed to relax when children petted him. He accepted chin scratches, ear rubs, and gentle pats along his back. Some children hugged him, and Duke seemed to enjoy these displays of affection, leaning slightly into the embrace. Emma's mother gently encouraged her to join the line. "Come on, sweetheart, look at how happy those children are, look at how gentle Duke is being." But Emma shook her head violently, her grip on her mother's hand tightening. "No, no, no, I can't, Mama, I can't do it." Her mother didn't push further. There were still people in line, and she recognized that Emma wasn't ready yet. Perhaps by the time the line dwindled, Emma might reconsider. As more children petted Duke, Emma continued to observe from her position at the back of the crowd. She noticed things she hadn't expected to notice. She saw how Duke's eyes remained soft and kind, how his body language communicated calmness rather than threat. She saw how Officer Martinez never forced any child to interact with the dog, respecting each child's comfort level. She noticed that Duke seemed genuinely happy to meet new people, his tail wagging with consistent enthusiasm. A little girl, probably about Emma's age, approached Duke hesitantly, not quite as fearful as Emma but clearly nervous. Officer Martinez knelt beside the girl and spoke softly, explaining that Duke was friendly and kind. The little girl extended her hand, and when her fingers touched Duke's head, a smile spread across her face. She giggled with pure joy and surprise at her own bravery. Seeing this interaction created something new inside Emma, not quite courage, but perhaps the tiniest seed of possibility. If that girl could do it, maybe, just maybe, Emma could too. But as the afternoon wore on and the line of children gradually diminished, Emma still hung back. She was curious now, genuinely interested in Duke, but her fear remained a powerful barrier. She remained rooted to her spot near her mother, watching, observing, slowly beginning to understand that perhaps this dog, this specific dog, wasn't the monster she'd feared. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across Riverside Park, Officer Martinez noticed something that had escaped most people's attention. At the edge of the gathered crowd, partially obscured by other families, stood a very small girl clinging desperately to her mother. While other children had rotated through the line multiple times, returning to pet Duke again and again, this little girl had remained frozen in place, watching with an intensity that suggested both fascination and profound fear. Officer Martinez had been doing this job for nearly 2 decades, and he developed an almost supernatural ability to read people, both adults and children. He could sense their emotions, their fears, their hidden desires. And right now, he could sense that this particular child was at a critical crossroads. The formal demonstration had concluded about 15 minutes earlier. Most of the crowd had dispersed, heading toward the ice cream vendors or other attractions the park offered. Only a handful of people remained, mostly parents who were gathering their children or people who wanted to ask Officer Martinez specific questions about Duke's training or police work. It was the perfect moment, quieter, less overwhelming, more intimate. Officer Martinez made a decision. He would approach that little girl and her mother. He would offer her an opportunity, but he would do so gently, respectfully, understanding that she was clearly struggling with something significant. Officer Martinez secured Duke's leash firmly in his hand and began walking slowly in Emma's direction. With each step, Emma's body became more rigid. She could see the officer coming toward them, and her first instinct was to panic. Was he going to force her to pet the dog? Would he be angry that she hadn't participated in the demonstration? Her mind raced with anxious thoughts. Her mother, sensing Emma's increased tension, placed a protective arm around her daughter's small shoulders. "Hello there," Officer Martinez said warmly as he approached, his voice deliberately soft and gentle, the same tone he used when calming frightened witnesses or distressed individuals at crime scenes. He directed his gaze primarily at Emma's mother, respecting the family dynamic while simultaneously keeping his awareness on the frightened child. "I noticed your daughter has been watching our demonstration very carefully. She seems quite interested in Duke, even though she appears a bit nervous about approaching him directly." Emma's mother nodded, relief flooding her features at this understanding, compassionate response. "She's been terrified of dogs since an incident about 6 months ago. We've been trying to help her overcome the fear, but it's been a slow process. She's much braver today than she was this morning, just watching from a distance." Officer Martinez smiled kindly, acknowledging the mother's perspective while simultaneously demonstrating his respect for Emma's feelings. He knelt down to a more level position, reducing his physical height and making himself less intimidating. Duke automatically sat beside him, perfectly trained to read his handler's intentions and match the energy of the situation. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Officer Martinez asked, directing his full attention to Emma for the first time. His eyes were warm and genuinely kind, the eyes of someone who had spent years working with vulnerable individuals and animals. Emma's voice emerged as barely a whisper, her lips barely moving. "Emma." It was the smallest sound, almost lost in the ambient noise of the park around them. "Emma," Officer Martinez repeated, as if her name was the most important word he'd heard all day. "That's a beautiful name. You know, I have a very important question for you. Would you like to hear it?" Emma glanced up at him uncertainly but nodded slightly, curiosity overriding her fear just enough to create an opening. Officer Martinez continued, "Duke has been doing demonstrations all day, and he's met many children. But I think he's been wondering if he might get to meet the brave little girl in the pink dress who's been watching him so carefully. What do you think? Do you think you might want to say hello to Duke?" Emma's immediate instinct was to say no. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to refuse, to hide deeper behind her mother. But something in Officer Martinez's delivery, something in the genuine kindness radiating from him, created a moment of hesitation. He hadn't demanded anything. He hadn't pressured her. He'd simply asked as if her answer, whether yes or no, would be perfectly acceptable to him. Emma's eyes darted between Officer Martinez and Duke, her small chest rising and falling with rapid, anxious breaths. Will he be okay?" Emma whispered, her question hanging in the air between them. Officer Martinez understood what she was really asking. "Will I be safe? Will he hurt me? Can I trust this?" "Emma, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you," Officer Martinez said, his voice taking on a slightly more serious but still gentle tone. "Duke is not just my police dog. Duke is also my best friend. I trust him completely. I've trained him for 5 years and I know exactly how he behaves. Right now, he's not in work mode. He's in friend mode. He's not looking for anyone to chase or anyone to protect against. He's looking for new friends to meet. And I truly believe that if you decide you want to say hello to Duke, he will be the gentlest, kindest dog you could possibly meet." Emma's mother squeezed her shoulder gently, adding her silent support to Officer Martinez's words. "You can do this, Emma. I'll be right beside you the whole time. You're safe." Emma looked at her mother, then back at Officer Martinez, then finally at Duke himself. The German shepherd was sitting perfectly still, his dark eyes tracking Emma's movement with what appeared to be genuine interest. His tail, which had been wagging enthusiastically with other children, now moved slowly and deliberately, as if Duke himself understood that this interaction required a gentler approach. "What if I get scared?" Emma asked, voicing one of her deepest concerns. "What if I want to stop?" Officer Martinez nodded seriously, respecting this legitimate question. "If you get scared, you can tell me and we can stop immediately. You're completely in control here, Emma. I'm just inviting you to come closer and say hello. If at any point you want to step back, you just say the word, okay." Emma took a shaky breath. She could feel her heart pounding in her tiny chest like a hummingbird trapped in a cage. Every instinct told her to refuse, to stay safe in the distance. But another voice, a quieter voice but growing stronger, whispered that this might be important. This might be an opportunity. She glanced around the park and noticed that several other people had stopped what they were doing and were now watching their small interaction. She could feel the weight of their attention, but somehow it also felt supportive rather than judgmental. Emma's mother gently lowered her hand to her daughter's back. "You're so much braver than you think you are, sweetheart. I know you can do this, but you only do it if you want to." It was the perfect balance of encouragement without pressure. Emma looked at Duke one more time. The dog was still sitting calmly, his expression patient and kind. He hadn't barked, he hadn't lunged, he hadn't done anything aggressive or frightening. He was simply waiting to see if this small girl in the pink dress would be brave enough to meet him. Something inside Emma, maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the desire to prove to herself that she could do something difficult, shifted almost imperceptibly. "Okay," Emma whispered, so quietly that Officer Martinez almost didn't hear her. "Okay, I'll try." Officer Martinez's face broke into a genuine, warm smile. "That's all I'm asking, Emma. You're already being very brave. Now, why don't you take my hand and we'll walk over to Duke together? Nice and slow, okay?" Emma reached out her tiny hand with trembling fingers and placed it in Officer Martinez's large, warm palm. His hand was calloused from years of police work, but his grip was gentle and reassuring. With her mother following closely behind them, Emma took her first steps toward the dog that had haunted her nightmares for months. Emma's small feet moved forward in slow, deliberate steps, each one feeling like she was climbing an enormous mountain. Officer Martinez walked beside her, his strong presence providing both physical and emotional support. Her mother stayed close behind, her hand hovering near Emma's back, not pushing, but ready to catch her if she needed to retreat. The afternoon air seemed to thicken around them, and Emma became hyper-aware of every sensation, every sound, every movement. Her breathing had become shallow and rapid, almost gasping in nature. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, so loud she wondered if everyone else could hear it too. With each step forward, Emma's anxiety intensified exponentially. The distance between herself and Duke seemed to shrink impossibly fast, even though they were moving at a snail's pace. The dog, who had seemed large from a distance, now appeared absolutely enormous, a mountain of fur and muscle that could swallow her whole. Emma's legs felt like they were made of water, threatening to collapse beneath her at any moment. She seriously questioned whether she could take even one more step. But Officer Martinez's steady presence beside her, and his occasional gentle words of encouragement, kept her moving forward. "You're doing amazing, Emma," Officer Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible above the ambient sounds of the park. "Just keep taking one step at a time. Duke is right here, and he's very excited to meet you." Emma wanted to respond, wanted to tell him that she couldn't do this, that she'd changed her mind and wanted to go back, but her voice seemed to have abandoned her completely. All she could manage were small, whimpering sounds that she wasn't even aware she was making. As they got closer, Emma could see Duke's features in greater detail than ever before. She noticed his dark brown eyes, which were alert but not aggressive. She noticed his ears, which stood at perfect attention, occasionally rotating to track sounds around the park. She noticed his nose, which was large and black and slightly moist. She noticed his mouth, and her anxiety spiked again as she thought about the teeth hidden behind those jaws, teeth that could bite, teeth that could hurt her. But Officer Martinez had said Duke would never bite her without a command, and Emma was beginning to realize that Officer Martinez was someone who told the truth. They came to a stop approximately 6 feet away from where Duke sat in his perfectly trained position. Officer Martinez remained standing, but he released Emma's hand gently, allowing her to stand independently. Emma's mother placed both hands on her daughter's small shoulders, providing stability and reassurance. Emma felt incredibly vulnerable now, exposed and alone despite being surrounded by people who loved her. The space between herself and Duke seemed both impossibly small and terrifyingly vast at the same time. Officer Martinez knelt down beside Duke, one hand resting gently on the dog's shoulder. "Emma, I want you to notice something very important," the officer said softly. "Look at Duke's body. See how relaxed he is. See how his muscles aren't tense. That means he's calm and happy. He's not preparing to do anything scary. He's just sitting here, waiting to meet you. Dogs are very good at reading people's emotions, and Duke knows that you're nervous, but he doesn't think you're threatening or dangerous. He just thinks you're someone new and interesting." Emma studied Duke carefully, her analytical mind trying to process what Officer Martinez was telling her. It was true. Duke didn't look tense or coiled like a spring. His body seemed genuinely relaxed. His tail, which had been wagging enthusiastically with other children, now moved slowly and steadily, as if he too understood that this situation required a gentler approach. Emma found herself watching that tail movement, finding something almost hypnotic about it. It was a constant motion, rhythmic and soothing, and somehow it helped calm her racing thoughts. "Duke, easy," Officer Martinez commanded softly, using a hand signal to indicate that the dog should remain in his current calm state. Duke's already relaxed posture became even more settled, as if the command had given him explicit permission to be completely gentle. Officer Martinez turned his attention back to Emma. "You see how Duke responded to my command. That's what training means. I can tell Duke exactly how to behave, and he listens. So right now, Duke is being as gentle and calm as possible just for you." Emma took a shaky breath, trying to slow her racing heart. "But what if I get scared?" she asked, her voice trembling. It was a legitimate concern, and she appreciated that Officer Martinez took it seriously rather than dismissing it. "If you get scared, we stop immediately," Officer Martinez reassured her. "There's no pressure here, Emma. This is completely at your pace. Some children touch Duke right away. Some children just stand here and talk to him for a while. Some children need to come back another day. All of those options are perfectly fine. You get to decide what happens." Emma felt a small shift inside herself, a minuscule expansion of her sense of control. She wasn't trapped here being forced to do something against her will. She had agency. She had choices. This realization, though small, empowered her in a significant way. Her breathing began to slow slightly, her heart rate dropping from panic levels to merely elevated levels. She was still terrified, but the quality of her terror had changed. It was no longer paralyzing, it was challenging. Can I just stand here for a while?" Emma asked softly. "Of course," Officer Martinez said warmly. "Stand here as long as you need to." So Emma stood, her mother's hand still on her shoulders, and she simply observed Duke. Minutes passed, perhaps only 3 or 4, but it felt like an eternity to Emma's anxious mind. She noticed details she'd missed before. She noticed the way Duke's breath moved in and out, steady and calm. She noticed the subtle variations in color in his coat, the tan areas interspersed with black markings. She noticed the way his ears occasionally rotated, responding to sounds in the environment. She noticed that he never once looked aggressive or threatening. In fact, he looked peaceful, almost serene. Slowly, almost without conscious decision, Emma's fear began to transform into curiosity. She found herself wondering what Duke's fur would feel like. Would it be soft? Would it be rough? Would it be warm? She'd felt her own dog, a stuffed animal, many times, but she'd never actually touched a real dog. Part of her desperately wanted to know what it would be like. Officer Martinez, sensing the subtle shift in Emma's emotional state, spoke quietly. "When you're ready, Emma, you can take one small step forward. That's all, just one step. If you want to stop after that, we stop. If you want to take another step, we'll do that too. You're in complete control." Emma's small body trembled, but not quite as intensely as before. She took one step forward, then another. Her mother moved with her, maintaining her protective presence. Emma was now only about 3 feet away from Duke. This was closer than she'd ever been to any dog since the incident at the neighbor's fence. Her hands were shaking visibly. Beads of perspiration dotted her forehead despite the fact that the sun was beginning to set and the air was cooling. "That's incredible, Emma," Officer Martinez whispered, genuine admiration in his voice. "You're being so brave. I can see how scared you are, but you're doing it anyway. Do you know what that makes you?" Emma shook her head slightly. "That makes you a hero," Officer Martinez said simply. "Real courage isn't the absence of fear. Real courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. That's what you're doing right now." Emma felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, though she wasn't entirely sure if they were tears of fear or tears of something else, perhaps relief, perhaps pride in herself for getting this far. Her hand, which had been clenched into a tight fist, began to relax slightly. Her breathing continued to improve. She was hyper-aware of every sensation, the warmth of her mother's hands on her shoulders, the cool evening breeze on her face, the sound of Duke's gentle breathing, the fatting warmth of the sun on her skin. I want to try," Emma whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "Try what?" Officer Martinez asked gently. "I want to try to touch him," Emma said, her voice barely audible. Officer Martinez's face broke into the widest smile. "Emma, that's wonderful. Whenever you're ready, you can reach out your hand very slowly. Let Duke see your hand coming toward him. Move very slowly so he knows it's coming. And you can touch him right on his head, okay?" Emma nodded, her entire body shaking with the effort of overcoming her deepest fear. Her tiny hand began to rise, moving through the air in slow motion. Every muscle in her body was tense with anticipation and terror, but something inside her, something brave and determined, kept that hand rising despite her overwhelming anxiety. Emma's tiny fingers trembled as they moved through the air toward Duke's head. Each millimeter of distance seemed to take an eternity to cross. Her hand rose higher, moving with the deliberate slowness of someone performing an act that required every ounce of courage she possessed. Officer Martinez remained perfectly still, understanding the sacred significance of this moment. He didn't speak, didn't make any sudden movements, didn't do anything that might startle Emma or interrupt her concentration. Her mother's hands remained steady on her shoulders, providing silent support and grounding. The distance closed, 6 inches away from Duke's head, then 4, then 2. Emma could feel the warmth radiating from the dog's body now, a warmth she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't threatening or alarming, it was comforting in an unexpected way. Her hand continued its slow trajectory, and then finally, after months of fear, after a morning of anxiety, after an afternoon of building courage, Emma's small fingers made contact with Duke's soft fur on the top of his head. The sensation was nothing like what Emma had imagined. She'd expected rough, coarse hair. Instead, she found her fingers sinking into surprisingly soft fur that felt almost luxurious beneath her trembling touch. It was warm, warmer than she'd expected, and there was a gentle firmness underneath the fur, the solid reality of a living, breathing creature. She could feel Duke's body heat transferring to her hand, a warmth that seemed to seep into her and somehow calm the frantic racing of her heart. The fur was clean and well-maintained, smelling of something she couldn't quite identify, but that wasn't unpleasant. Perhaps shampoo, perhaps just the natural scent of a healthy animal. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't scary. This was actually nice. Her fear didn't disappear completely. It was still there, lurking in the background of her consciousness. But it had transformed into something different, something that could coexist with curiosity and wonder. Duke, sensing Emma's touch and understanding the significance of this interaction, did something that would forever remain etched in Emma's memory. He turned his head slightly toward her, leaning gently into her hand. It was a gesture of affection, a conscious choice by the dog to acknowledge her touch and respond positively to it. The movement was slow and gentle, not sudden or aggressive in any way. It was an invitation to deepen the connection, to understand that this large animal chose to accept her presence and her touch. Officer Martinez watched the interaction unfold, his eyes glistening with emotion. He'd witnessed countless human-animal interactions over his 2 decades of police work, but something about this particular moment, a terrified child overcoming her deepest fear and connecting with his partner, touched something profound within him. He understood that he was witnessing not just a child learning to trust an animal, but a child learning to trust herself. A child discovering her own capacity for courage. Emma's mother gasped softly, her hand flying briefly to her mouth in astonishment. She'd brought Emma here hoping that exposure to a calm, well-trained dog might help reduce her daughter's anxiety. But she hadn't truly expected this, hadn't dared to hope that Emma would actually make physical contact, let alone that she would experience what appeared to be a genuinely positive interaction. Tears began to form in her eyes as she witnessed her daughter's transformation. Other park visitors who had lingered in the area began to notice what was happening. A small crowd started gathering, drawn by the magnetism of witnessing something genuinely meaningful. Parents pointed out the scene to their children, but there was no judgment in their observation, only warmth and encouragement. Several people smiled knowingly, perhaps remembering their own moments of conquering childhood fears. Emma's stroking became slightly bolder, more confident. Her hand moved from Duke's head along the side of his neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the soft fur. She could feel his pulse, the steady rhythm of a living heartbeat beneath her palm. This realization, that Duke was a living being with a heart and blood and feelings just like her, created a profound shift in her understanding. Duke wasn't a monster. Duke wasn't a threat. Duke was a creature that had chosen to accept her, to allow her to touch him, to connect with her on a fundamental level. "You're doing so beautifully, Emma," Officer Martinez whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Emma didn't respond with words, but her entire body seemed to settle into the moment. Her breathing, which had been rapid and shallow throughout the afternoon, began to find a more natural rhythm. Her hand continued to stroke Duke's fur, and she found herself noticing textures and sensations she hadn't expected. The fur varied in length and thickness in different areas. Around his neck, it was longer and thicker. Along his sides, it was smoother and denser. Behind his ears, it was softer and more delicate. Duke's tail began to wag with increased enthusiasm, as if he understood that this little girl was no longer afraid, that she had crossed some invisible threshold, and was now beginning to genuinely enjoy his presence. The wagging wasn't aggressive or frantic. It was a steady, happy motion that communicated contentment and affection. Emma found her eyes drawn to the wagging tail, and she realized that she'd read about this in books, that a dog's tail wagging indicated happiness and friendliness. Her rational mind was catching up with her intuitive experience, beginning to integrate the reality of Duke's gentle nature with her previous fear-based assumptions. "Do you want to keep petting him?" Officer Martinez asked softly. "You can pet his chest or his back or anywhere you'd like. Duke loves affection." Emma nodded, too emotionally overwhelmed to speak. She moved her hand along Duke's shoulder and back, exploring the landscape of his powerful body. Every touch sent a message to her brain. This is safe. This is okay. This creature that you feared is actually kind and gentle. With each stroke, Emma felt layers of fear melting away, like snow under spring sunshine. It wasn't that her fear disappeared completely in an instant. Fear rarely works that way. But it diminished significantly, morphing from a controlling, paralyzing force into something manageable, something that could be challenged and overcome. Duke leaned slightly into Emma's touches, pressing his body against her hand in a way that suggested he was enjoying the interaction as much as she was. The dog's eyes remained soft and gentle, his entire demeanor communicating acceptance and patience. Officer Martinez had trained Duke incredibly well, but what Emma was experiencing now wasn't just the result of training. It was genuine affection from an animal who recognized in this small girl a kindred spirit who needed connection and reassurance. Tears began to stream down Emma's face, surprising her with their intensity. She wasn't sure why she was crying. There was fear in those tears, yes, but there was also joy, relief, wonder, and a sense of personal triumph that her small 3-year-old mind was struggling to fully comprehend. Her mother bent down and wrapped her arms around Emma, creating a cocoon of safety and love while Emma continued to touch and stroke Duke. "It's okay, sweetheart," her mother whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "You did it. You were so brave." Emma looked at Duke's face, at the intelligent eyes that watched her with what appeared to be genuine affection. The dog's tongue lolled out slightly, his expression relaxed and content. In that moment, Emma experienced a fundamental shift in her perception of reality. Dogs weren't monsters. This dog, Duke, was a friend, a protector, a kind being who had shown her nothing but gentleness and patience. The afternoon sun continued its descent, casting long, golden shadows across Riverside Park. Emma's hand remained on Duke's fur, and she allowed herself to simply experience this moment, a moment that would serve as a turning point in her life. She didn't know it yet, but the fear that had controlled so much of her existence for the past 6 months was beginning its final retreat. For several minutes, Emma remained lost in the quiet intimacy of her connection with Duke. Time seemed to stop in that golden hour of late afternoon, with the sun painting everything in shades of amber and rose. Her tears had continued to flow, but their nature had transformed. They were no longer tears of fear or anxiety, but tears of something deeper: release, transformation, joy, and the overwhelming emotion of having conquered something that had seemed insurmountable just hours earlier. Her mother stood beside her, one hand still resting gently on her daughter's back, witnessing the profound shift taking place in her child. Officer Martinez remained standing nearby, giving Emma and Duke space while maintaining a protective presence. He understood that this moment was sacred, that interrupting it with words or action would diminish its significance. He'd learned through years of police work that sometimes the most powerful things happened in silence, in the space between words where genuine human-animal connection could flourish without interference or narration. Emma's hand continued to move across Duke's fur with increasing confidence. Her initial terror had transformed into wonder, and then into something even more profound: a sense of deep connection and trust with this animal that had represented everything she feared. She could feel Duke's muscles relaxing beneath her touch, the dog settling into an even more comfortable position, as if he too recognized the importance of this moment. His breathing remained steady and calm, his presence entirely devoted to this small girl and her journey. The gathered crowd, which had grown to perhaps 30 or 40 people by this point, remained respectfully quiet. Parents had gently instructed their children to observe quietly, understanding instinctively that this was not a moment for noise or disruption. Phones had come out, people were documenting the scene, but they did so silently, respecting the sanctity of what was unfolding. The entire park seemed to hold its breath, suspended in this perfect moment of human-animal connection. Emma looked at Duke's face once more, studying the details that had initially terrified her. His alert ears, his dark, intelligent eyes, his strong jaw, his warm breath, all of these features that had seemed threatening now appeared noble, gentle, protective. She thought about everything Officer Martinez had told her, about how Duke saved lives, about how he helped people, about how he was trained to be kind and controlled. Her mind was beginning to integrate all of this information with her direct experience, and it all aligned perfectly. This dog was exactly what Officer Martinez had described: a hero, a protector, a being of immense goodness. Emma's breathing had become completely normal now, her heartbeat no longer racing. The adrenaline that had flooded her system throughout the afternoon was gradually being replaced by a sense of calm accomplishment and quiet joy. She'd done something she thought was impossible. She'd faced her deepest fear and discovered that on the other side of that fear was not danger, but connection and love. Officer Martinez made eye contact with Emma's mother and gave a subtle nod, silently communicating that this had been an extraordinary interaction, perhaps one of the most meaningful human-animal connections he'd witnessed in his professional career. Emma's mother nodded back, tears streaming freely down her own face now. She was witnessing her daughter not just overcome a fear, but transform into a braver, more capable version of herself. Emma continued to gaze into Duke's eyes, and in that moment, something shifted within her consciousness. She wanted to express what she was feeling, the gratitude, the wonder, the joy, the pride in herself. She wanted to acknowledge this amazing animal that had shown her such gentleness and kindness. She wanted to communicate that she understood now, that she saw Duke for what he truly was. Emma took a deep breath, drawing air into her lungs from deep within her belly. The breath itself seemed significant, as if she was preparing to say something important, something that would mark this moment as a turning point. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was clear and firm despite her young age. It carried a resonance that seemed disproportionate to her size, as if all of her courage and her newfound understanding were being channeled into these words. "Good boy, Duke," Emma said, her voice steady and sincere. Each word was carefully pronounced, spoken with complete conviction and genuine affection. The simplicity of those two words created an almost electric silence across the park. For a moment no one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. The words hung in the air like something precious and crystalline, their significance far exceeding their simple vocabulary. Those two words represented so much more than a child praising a dog. They represented triumph over fear, the bridging of an unbridgeable gulf, the transformation of terror into love. Officer Martinez's eyes filled with tears so suddenly and intensely that he had to blink several times to clear his vision. He'd heard "good boy" thousands of times before. Every dog owner, every trainer, every police officer said those words regularly to their canine partners. But he'd never heard them spoken with such weight, such meaning, such profound emotional significance. This wasn't just praise for a dog's behavior. This was a child telling an animal, "I see you. I understand you. I trust you. I'm grateful for what you've shown me about myself." Emma's mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked down at her daughter with wonder and pride flooding through her. Her baby, her brave, terrified baby, had just spoken those words with more maturity and emotional depth than many adults could muster. The tears flowed freely down her mother's face now, tears of joy, tears of pride, tears of witnessing transformation. The gathered crowd erupted. At first there were a few scattered gasps, then murmurs of amazement, and finally spontaneous applause that built in intensity and enthusiasm. People were clapping, some were wiping their own eyes, some were smiling with genuine warmth and emotion. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking why everyone was clapping, why people were crying. This moment had transcended the simple act of a child petting a dog. It had become something symbolically significant that resonated with the universal human experience of overcoming fear and discovering courage. Duke responded to Emma's words with a gentle movement of his head, leaning into her hand once more. The dog's tail wagged with steady, confident rhythm. Officer Martinez could have sworn that Duke understood the significance of what had just happened, that the dog recognized in Emma's words a profound acknowledgement of his character and his value. The bond between them, between Emma and Duke, had crystallized in that moment, solidified by those two simple words and everything they represented. Emma stood there, still stroking Duke's fur, still gazing into his eyes, tears continuing to stream down her face. But her expression had transformed completely. Where there had been fear and anxiety just an hour ago, there was now peace and joy and wonder. The mountain she'd been climbing had reached its summit, and from this vantage point she could see her entire journey, All the fear she'd carried, all the anxiety she'd endured, all the barriers she'd constructed in her mind. Officer Martinez approached slowly and carefully, giving Emma space but also making his presence known. He knelt beside the girl and the dog, and without speaking, he placed his hand on Emma's shoulder. The gesture communicated volumes: pride, respect, acknowledgement of her extraordinary bravery, gratitude for allowing him to witness this transformation. The applause continued for another minute, a testament to the profound emotional impact of what everyone had just witnessed. This wasn't just a child overcoming a fear. It was a reminder that courage exists in all of us, waiting to be discovered. It was a reminder that connection and trust can bridge seemingly impossible divides. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful things in life are expressed in just two simple words, spoken with complete sincerity and genuine heart. The weeks that followed Emma's transformative encounter with Duke unfolded like pages in a story that seemed too beautiful to be true. The incident at Riverside Park had rippled through her life in ways that no one could have predicted. Within days, the local news station had picked up the story. A 3-year-old girl overcoming her fear of dogs through an interaction with a police K-9. The segment aired during the evening news, complete with footage of Emma's initial hesitation, her brave steps forward, and those two life-altering words, "Good boy, Duke." The video went viral on social media, accumulating thousands of views from people who were moved by Emma's display of courage. Parents reached out to Officer Martinez, asking if they could bring their own fearful children to meet Duke. Teachers used the video in classrooms to discuss courage and overcoming fears. Emma had unknowingly become an inspiration to countless people she'd never met. But more importantly, Emma's transformation was visible to those closest to her. Within a week of the park encounter, her mother took her to the local animal shelter, expecting to introduce Emma to various rescue dogs in a controlled environment. Emma, however, had other plans. She wanted to volunteer. She wanted to help. The shelter director, moved by Emma's enthusiasm and her mother's explanation of her recent fear, arranged a volunteer position that was age-appropriate and safe. Every Saturday morning, Emma and her mother would visit the shelter, where Emma would help with basic tasks, filling water bowls, laying out beds in the dog kennels, distributing treats under careful supervision. What had once been her greatest fear had become her greatest passion. Emma would arrive at the shelter with infectious enthusiasm, eager to spend time with the rescue dogs. She learned their names, their personalities, their individual quirks and preferences. She understood which dogs needed gentle handling, which ones were playful, which ones were shy or traumatized. The shelter staff marveled at Emma's intuitive connection with the animals. She seemed to understand them on a fundamental level, perhaps because she'd walked in their emotional shoes. Having experienced her own trauma and fear, she could recognize and respond to the fear in others. Officer Martinez maintained regular contact with Emma's family. Every few weeks, he would send photographs and updates about Duke's ongoing rescue missions. When Duke successfully located a lost child in the nearby mountains, Officer Martinez personally delivered the news to Emma. The girl's face lit up with pride and joy. "Duke saved someone," she exclaimed, hugging the photographs to her chest. Officer Martinez sat with Emma and her family, sharing stories about Duke's heroic work, and Emma listened with rapt attention, understanding deeply the importance of what her friend Duke did. By her 4th birthday, just a few months after the park encounter, Emma had become a familiar and beloved figure at the animal shelter. The staff celebrated her birthday at the facility, complete with cupcakes and decorations. Emma spent the entire day interacting with the dogs, and her mother documented the joy radiating from her daughter's face. The fearful, anxious child who had clung to her mother just months earlier was gone, replaced by a confident, compassionate girl who understood that courage meant acting despite fear. Emma's older brother Marcus witnessed his sister's transformation and underwent his own evolution. Guilt over his earlier teasing prompted him to become Emma's protector and cheerleader. He helped her with her volunteer work at the shelter, assisted in caring for rescue dogs, and became a vocal advocate for animal welfare. The dynamic between brother and sister shifted from one of mockery to one of mutual respect and shared passion. Marcus even began talking about potentially becoming a veterinarian or animal behaviorist, inspired by his sister's remarkable journey. At preschool, Emma became known as the dog girl. When teachers introduced lessons about animals or about overcoming fears, Emma was often asked to share her story. She would stand in front of her classmates, speaking with surprising eloquence about her experience with Duke, about how she'd been scared but decided to be brave anyway. Other children, inspired by her narrative, began to confront their own fears: fear of heights, fear of water, fear of the dark. Emma's story became a template for understanding that fear didn't have to be permanent, that bravery was accessible to everyone. The animal shelter, recognizing Emma's special connection and her growing influence, created a children's volunteer program inspired partially by her example. They trained other young children in age-appropriate animal care tasks, allowing families to experience what Emma and her mother had discovered, that connecting with animals in need could be transformative. The program became wildly successful, and within a year, dozens of children were volunteering regularly at the shelter. Emma, though still very young, became an unofficial mentor to these younger volunteers, gently guiding them and demonstrating the proper way to interact with frightened or traumatized animals. A year after the park encounter, Officer Martinez arranged a special meeting. He brought Duke to Emma's preschool for a formal demonstration, not a police training showcase, but a celebration of the bond between Emma and Duke. The entire school gathered to watch as Emma and the German Shepherd demonstrated their connection. Duke responded to Emma's commands with remarkable precision. Emma, confident and poised, explained to her peers about police dogs and their important work. But more importantly, she talked about friendship, about trust, about how humans and animals could connect across species and language barriers. Emma's mother documented her daughter's growth throughout this entire period. She photographed Emma at the animal shelter, laughing with rescue dogs. She recorded video of Emma confidently explaining animal behavior to her preschool class. She saved every card and letter from people who'd been inspired by Emma's story. These materials became a precious archive of transformation, evidence of how one moment of courage could transform not just an individual child, but ripple outward to influence countless others. But perhaps most significantly, Emma learned the fundamental life lesson that would guide her for years to come. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's taking action despite being afraid. She had lived this truth, embodied it, demonstrated it. And through her example, she was teaching this lesson to everyone around her. When Emma was afraid of something, and 3-year-old still had plenty of fears, she would remind herself of Duke, of that moment in the park when she'd taken that first trembling step forward. If she could overcome her fear of dogs, she could overcome other fears too. By the time Emma reached kindergarten, she was a different child than the terrified toddler who'd clung to her mother in Riverside Park. She was confident, compassionate, and courageous. She was passionate about animals and about helping creatures in need. She had friends at school and in her community. She volunteered regularly at the shelter. She received cards and messages from strangers who'd been inspired by her story. She had a best friend named Duke, a German Shepherd police dog who had taught her more about life and courage than any adult could have articulated. Officer Martinez and Emma maintained their friendship throughout the years. He watched her grow from a terrified toddler into a brave, kind, and compassionate young person. He understood that he had been merely an instrument in Emma's journey, the facilitator, not the creator of her transformation. Duke, his remarkable partner, had provided the bridge across which Emma could cross from fear to love, from anxiety to confidence. The story of Emma and Duke became more than just a heartwarming anecdote about a child overcoming her fear of dogs. It became a testament to the power of courage, the transformative nature of connection, and the extraordinary capacity of both humans and animals to change lives. It demonstrated that sometimes, the most profound transformations happen not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in quiet encounters where a small child discovers that the monster in her imagination is actually a friend waiting to be discovered. And that discovery, that moment when Emma whispered, "Good boy, Duke," became the defining moment that shaped not just Emma's future, but the futures of everyone whose lives she would touch.